welcome everyone to this call and this conversation with Dr. Bruce Linton in Berkeley, California. Uh, Bruce has spent the past 25 years facilitating dad groups for fathers of young children. And he's also the founder of the Fathers Forum, which offers programs like men's groups for fathers of young children, workshops for new dads, expectant dads. And Dr. Linton is also the author of Becoming a Dad, How Fatherhood Changes Men, and also runs a private counseling practice where he specializes in working with fathers, men, and couples with young children. So, Bruce, I'm really glad that we get a chance to connect like this, and I'm really excited about hearing all that you've experienced and learned and seen since you started this work.
Thanks, Mickey. Well, I was excited to talk with you too, seeing as um, you're in Sweden, is that right?
That's right. Yeah.
And I'm here in California, and that it seemed like we were kind of encountering some similar things around men who are becoming dads. And we were talking a little bit earlier before you started the recording, and you were talking about having worked with five dads on three continents, and kind of noticing some similarities that when men become fathers or in the process of becoming fathers or are dads already, that there is a sense that you see that some of these men are reaching out and wanting to connect with other dads. And I think that's been central to my work. And what I saw very early on was that it really relates to us. I see it in the developmental stages of us becoming dads, that it's a real opportunity in our life to open up to being a little more vulnerable and being a little more available to realize how much we need other men, because we were commenting a little bit on this earlier, before you started the recording, that geez, there's this idea that we as men need to go it alone and we don't need any help. We can do it on our own. And I really think what underlies that is a sense of shame sometimes for
Mm.
us as men. We can't handle it all by ourselves, and there's something wrong with me. And I think when you become a dad and you realize, oh my God, or becoming a dad, you're like, geez, what this is really um, overwhelming, or this is really a change. I'm not sure what it's going to be like. It's an opportunity where a lot of men say, hey, I really need to talk to another dad, another man who's going through this.
Mm.
And that's really the foundation of my work, is bringing expectant dads and new dads. I work with dads with kids 5 and under in groups to talk about, what it takes to develop as a man, to be part of a family, and find the really, really, I mean, these guys find the deepest meaning of their lives in being parents. But I think we need the experience of being with other men, with other dads, to kind of help facilitate that.
Mm. Yeah, and it makes me wonder what you see in the dads that you've worked with. Uh, what are some of the most common reasons for the men that find you? What are the reasons they're looking for that support? What do you hear them say and express around that?
Well, I, I, I think it comes from a couple of things. I just got a call. I have a group coming up next Saturday for some expectant dads. Um, and I got a call from a guy, and he just said, I heard about your class of dads who are men who are getting ready to be dads, and I'm just freaking out. I need to talk with somebody. So, so that's sort of like what I hear quite often. Um, and I think there's a willingness, and I think I was talking to you about, it takes a lot of courage to reach out.
Mm.
But I think also, um, along with the courage, I think that there, is like when you get in that situation of feeling, wow, this is really different or overwhelming for me, becomes sort of a kind of an urgency. So
Mm.
maybe you're willing, maybe we as men are willing to take risks in desperate situations we wouldn't take otherwise. So maybe the advent of becoming a father is a desperate enough situation where another man would say, I better get some help with this.
Yeah.
Now, and I think there's also, I used to get many, many more calls from expectant moms saying, "Hey, my husband, he should take a group too, and here's his number. Give him a call."
Hmm.
That's what really started out. I think I was getting about 70% of the calls about my becoming a father class or my men's group for dads from the moms. But as time has gone on and word has gotten around, I'm getting more and more calls from men, and men are talking to other men. I think you might find this in your coaching work yourself, where dad has had some benefit in working with you, or some of the few dads you might have talked with together. And they'll tell a friend, "Hey, talk to Mickey. He was really helpful." So that's helped a lot. I think that's developed over time
Mm.
as that word gets out. And I was speaking a few years ago at a La Leche League meeting, and I was just kind of brought in. The moms were doing their thing, and they said, "Well, Bruce, why don't you? We'll have a forum for dads who are coming with their wives who want to maybe connect up." And there was about 25 guys that came, and they were from 19 different countries.
Wow.
So I think something's happening all around the world. And it was really amazing because the conclusion we came to at the end of our meeting was didn't matter if we were from, India or China or Mexico or Czechoslovakia. We all had our own ways of doing things, but in some way, we all had to do the same thing. We were all going through some similar journeys, even though they took place differently in our culture. And part of that I outlined in the research that I did in the developmental phases of fatherhood. I found that there were four main phases that we go through in the process of becoming dads, or really not that we go through, ways that we can or may develop. And although I looked at it in the early years of parenting, I think it probably goes over the whole arc of us being parents. But the first stage or phase is what you brought up. It's like, well, why do we start to reach out? And everybody in the literature, when I did my literature review, talked about becoming a father as a crisis stage for men.
Mm.
And that wasn't really accurate. And I redefined that a little and changed that, not really a crisis, but I called it the emergent phase, coming out of emergency.
Hmm.
And so it is kind of emergency, like, hey, I'm freaking out. What do I do now? But emergent, I think, describes it better because I think what's happening is something is arising within us, something is emerging. And I think it is connecting with something about, hey, we do need other people. And the beginning of understanding that dependency, I think, is the doorway to kind of recognizing what our children are all about, particularly in those early years, about how dependent and vulnerable they are. So the point that I made um, is that, and that I see with this, Mickey, is that as we have a child and see them being vulnerable and just completely dependent, we kind of recognize that inside ourselves.
Yeah.
And rather than be frightened away by that and kind of spend all our time working or moving away from our family, I think that when we recognize that and see that's a vulnerability we have in ourselves, and that we reach out also in some ways and need people we're dependent upon people too, that emergent phase comes up, and we kind of regain something that gets lost in that traditional masculinity of
Mm.
need people, I'm all on my own. We need our band of brothers, we need our family, we need our close friends. And that is coming in the emergent phase where we recognize that inside ourselves a bit, all the changes that are going to come about. And then the next phase I call I call the is the um, phase where it's a really early period where we're doing I call it the attachment phase, where we're really getting attached to our baby and our wife. And that takes place. And I'm really very protective for new dads around those first few weeks, first few months, first year, to kind of let all the pieces come together. It's a little like those snow globes to Christmas. You know how you have a snow globe and you shake it, and all of the little bits of white fake snow kind of fill up the globe, and then you set it down, and little by little they settle, and you can see a Christmas tree or Santa Claus or a little scene in the globe. I think that's pretty much what happens pretty early on. There's so many things going on, but that attachment phase really needs time together and getting to know your wife as a mom and the dependency of your baby and getting to experience your own feelings around all that. So that attachment phase is kind of the next few months. And then what I came across, which became sort of my contribution to the literature, was what's called the affiliation phase. And that's what I think you and I are, um, Mickey, I think that's why you and I are here today, is there's something about wanting to feel connected with other men. And I found that the dads that were in my group, the dads that came to my Becoming a Father workshop, they felt an affiliation with other men. And that helped support some internal growth inside them and being able to go forward. And I think it really normalizes a lot of the anxieties we have in the early years of parenting, where we start to see, wow, I thought I was the only one feeling this, and then you start to see that every other guy is feeling some version of what you're feeling about the transition of parenthood. And then the fourth phase, I call the community phase, and I see that really happening around when our kids are 4, 5, 6, and they start to get involved in. It has two parts to it. One, it takes place developmentally when our kids start to get involved in maybe kindergarten, maybe preschool, maybe first grade, somewhere in there where we're connected with a larger community. But more important than that is it's a feeling inside us as men where we begin to feel like, wait a minute, hey, I'm getting concerned about the environment. I'm getting concerned about education. I'm getting concerned about global economics. Because this world and what goes on outside of me is really important because it's affecting my child or my children. And I think that's one of the things that is that the dads talk about a lot in my groups. As they, at some point, they said, I'm no longer just focused on myself. I'm focused on my family. I'm focused on my wife. I'm focused on my kid. Actually, I'm focused on a bigger world. And that, I think, is kind of a birth of almost a kind of a new humanism within us as men. I see it as, again, more of like reclaiming our emotional life that, kind of has been so limited and cut off in the kind of modern, industrial, fast paced, do what you need to do, take care of yourself, self interest trumps all. That I think that final phase is kind of a new humanism where we feel part of a bigger community and a responsibility towards the next generation. And that, I think, really, really gives some very deep meaning to our lives.
Mm.
Because I think there's always that question about like what is this all about? What's the meaning of my life? And it used to be so focused on work for men, right? People, hey, what do you do? And that was sort of a defining issue. And I guess the final thing I want to say right here, look, I've been going on for a long time here.
Beautiful, beautiful.
what I want to say is I don't want to ever, I think work is very important in our life as men. Um, and I think parenthood has become and now is a very important part in our life. And I don't want to diminish work. I just want us to be able to raise the value of parenthood for us as men. And not so they compete with each other because we need them both. And that's
Hmm.
always a big issue in the groups. What's the work family balance? That's important. But I think us seeing how integral it is to us as being men that parenting is now is really the change that's happening worldwide. And that we're all valuing that, and that we as men can support each other with parenting. And still, again, as I'm saying, and value the things we do in work and our creative efforts and our jobs. That's also very important too.
So in that, I love hearing about the four phases, and it resonates with what I've seen and what I feel myself as a dad. In that, having children is a huge gift and an invitation to really heal parts of myself, to expand parts of myself and grow more fully into my own powers, my own gifts. As I kind of try to relearn really what is my full nurturing capacity uh, for my child, for myself, and also for the community around us as a family. I'm wondering if you're seeing in your groups as men go through these four phases and come to the phase where they realize that they're kind of they have a role to play in creating the context that also nurtures the child, right? The environment, the social and natural environment, even if you will. Uh, do you see a lot of the men or some men kind of looking at their choices, their choice, their work, their career, and wondering if there's other ways they can hold that role, or is it a big shift in how they look at their careers really as they get into that place of creating and nurturing community around them to hold their kids?
Yeah, that's a very good point because I think that's pretty central um, to most of the dads that I see. Um, so I think the economic issues are pretty central for a lot of men today because the economics, as we're talking about in the world, is pretty tough on young families. And in the United States, at least, there's not a lot of support. You don't get a lot of support for parenting.
Right.
I mean, I think there's the myth about that. I think you do a better job in Sweden. We have like 6 weeks off that maybe you can, get some stipend perhaps from the government, but it's very minimal. It's very minimal. In the United States, if you put your child in child care and both parents work, you get a tax credit. So
Hmm.
the incentive is to have someone else taking care of your children. So I think dads are really trying to find a private solution to a public problem. And I think what happens then is that you see couples creating in their own lives, some with shared child care with other families, um, but trying to find ways to working one and a quarter job between two people so they can make enough money, but they can provide or be with their family. But we're all looking for ways, the dads in the group, to figure out how to balance out the work, the economics of work, and the being family. But I do think, like you're finding, there's an interest. It's not just, hey, I want to make, bring home the bread. I want to sit down at the table and have
Yeah.
dinner, eat with my family. So I think there's that acknowledgement that, wait a minute, I really be missing out on something if all my work does is provide for my family economically. I want to be in that emotional arena also. And it's very, but I think, Mickey, the point is important to make is every guy, every dad has a different um, way of doing that.
Mm.
And many years ago, Arthur and Libby Coleman wrote a book called The Father. And Arthur Coleman is a Jungian analyst here in the Bay Area. And what they did is they said, let's look at parenting without gender. let's say what happens outside of the house is sky parenting, and let's say what happens inside of the house or around the family is earth parenting. And let's not say that that has anything to do with men or women, that we each need a component. How much sky do we need? How much being out in the world, work, out in the world, politics and community? And how much do we need of being at home with the kids, around the house, taking care of things within the house? That we need a balance between earth and sky. And they encourage people and couples to find out what that is for each of them individually and what that is for them as a couple.
Mm.
So I think if you look at the Earth, sky balance for each couple, and when I've talked about this before, I've had guys say, "Yeah, my wife is really a sky person."
Hmm.
And I was in New York a while ago, and a couple of the dads there were stay-at-home dads, and it really worked for them, and they were very self-reflective. They felt really good at being with the kids, and their wives were attorneys.
Hmm. Hmm.
Was very out in the world, very extroverted, needed to connect up with lots of people, liked to have a lot going on at once. And you could see how they were each regulating their family life based on what worked for them individually, and most important, what worked for their family.
Mm.
So I think one of the things you and I could do in our work with men would be to try to help them see, well, what works for you? And for some guys, that's a 40, 50-hour week. For some guys, it's a stay-at-home dad. For some moms, it's a stay-at-home mom. For some moms, it's a full-time working mom. For some parents, it's half-time each. So I think that's really important. And I found in my work when doing the groups, being very protective of each man's decision to kind of work on their life in the way they need to.
Yeah.
Because I think one of the things that can come up is you and I are very excited about it. When men get together, when dads get together, it's such a great feeling. It's such a exciting and positive forward movement. I think one of the shadow sides or dark parts of that is if I watch the group, I have to be careful that we're so competitive as men,
Mm.
or in the cultures we're often brought up to be so competitive.
Right.
So sometimes I have to watch and make sure that one dad's way of working it out for his family doesn't come across to another dad as like, oh, I figured it out. My wife and I, we're each doing 50%. And I want to be aware that we don't get into, I'm being a better dad than you because I'm doing it this way.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that we can become more like, wow, that really works for you. And hey, you're doing it completely different, but you seem really happy and your kids seem to be doing really well. That's great for you. So I think that diversity in family styles,
Mm.
um, that if we can support that with men, that's really, really important too.
And to have that space for being heard and listened to, and to discover that yourself, what is right for you, for your partner, for your child, because it's obviously the context is different, the dynamics are different, the individual gifts and characteristics are different. And so yeah, it's
Yeah.
definitely and I see that as being one of the values of being able to have a circle of men or circle of dads, or the way you counsel one on one and in couples, and I coach one on one, to have that dialogue and have someone listen is hugely supportive. And I'm wondering, and I know that myself, for myself as well, but I'm wondering, in the support you offer in the circles that you facilitate, what have you found to be most powerful for the men in terms of the impact on them and the relationship to their children and their partners? Is there a It's a very general question, I'm realizing as I ask it, but I'm wondering is
No, it's
what.
a good question. It's a good question, and it stimulates two things.
Mm.
One of them you mentioned just a minute ago, but I don't want that to go unacknowledged. Like that idea that we could be in a group and be heard. You see it's valuable one to one, but when you're in a group, that you can be heard by the group. I think that is really central to the work that I do. And
Mm.
I think that's probably my greatest contribution. I mean, I have a lot of good information. I've done research and everything from research I've done to bringing in articles. Sometimes I'll show videos, sometimes I'll read poetry. I've got lots of good material, but really the benefit the men get is by being able to be, and there's 7 guys in my group, in the groups that I do. Um, and I think that being able to facilitate or being able to support, making sure each man gets heard without a value judgment
Mm,
uh, on what they have to say, that kind of openness, that's kind of what allows the men to be intimate together. And that's the key thing. So I think what you said about being heard is really important. And then what that leads to is like what kind of like what would be the one of the main benefits that I see is it really improves their relationships with their wives.
right.
I think that when we're just going with on our own with our as a couple, the pressure for the intimacy between the husband and the wife, your wife to be your wife, your lover, your best friend, your closest confidant, your buddy, the person who's there for you all the time, the person who understands everything you say and can anticipate and appreciate your needs. I mean, that's too much to put on one relationship or one person. And I
Mm,
think the dads find that hearing how each other dad is struggling in the group and being heard about all the different issues, whether it's work, marriage, changing the sexuality after the baby comes, issues with their own dads, issues with their family members and friends, issues they have with friends that don't have kids now that they have kids. That's always a big one. But I think it allows them to have a kind of intimacy that takes the pressure off the marriage.
mm,
And they actually have much better relationships with their wives. And out of that, I think there's more shared parenting that comes around how they parent their child. But it really helps to be able to come into the group and say, I can't believe my wife thinks this or did this. Because you might have argued with your wife, or maybe you don't even consider saying that to your wife. I can't believe you say this. You can say it to some other guys. You guys, she said this, her mother has to come and stay with us for 2 weeks. What do I tell her? That's going to be too hard. And then hear the other dads kind of share in that.
right.
That's really important. And that's probably key when we talk about our own fathers, kind of one of the major themes that circles through the group over and over again is our relationship with our own fathers. And, it ranges from guys who have dads that they say, geez, I want to incorporate so many things that my father did. He was so great. To dads who say, I know how to be a great dad, like easy for me to be a great dad. I just do everything the opposite my dad did. So, everybody's father contributed to them being a good father in one way or another. But sometimes it feels like when we're talking about an issue about being a good father and what we got from our fathers, sometimes it feels like with the 6 or 7 men in the room, we bring into the room like one really good father
Mm,
by all of our different comments, and you can almost feel the presence.
mm,
So somebody will have a question and say, well, what would we do as dads? How could we handle this? And then everybody makes a little bit of a contribution, and it's like, wow, we've really had a caring, loving, present father visit us tonight and kind of help us along our way. So I think those aspects, the being heard, the not having having the intimacy with the dad's group, helping the marriage, and then when it comes particularly to issues of our own fathers, I work with dads individually in counseling, psychotherapy, but talking about your father and your experiences with a group of other dads, I think that's very powerful when that's possible. So those are a few of the aspects that I think are central to the fathers groups that I do.
mm. It's almost as if when you talk about this, visit of a great dad, how it's almost like tapping into some collective wisdom there and shared knowledge and experience from dads of, well, best practices is almost too mechanical, but certainly well, Brene Brown calls it wholehearted parenting. That we might be challenged in different ways, but when we share what works for us, there's a collective wisdom there that's beautiful. And also, what comes up for me is something that I think of as the social ecology. When you have take the pressure off your partner and you share that with other men or other people, you kind of create a greater diversity around the family, which helps to hold the family more solidly and thoroughly.
Yeah,
Knowing, yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
yeah, no, I think you're really right. I think that's really you're really describing um, a kind of fatherhood that I think we all aspire to. That's a larger collective than our own. I'm not just talking about being a father myself in fatherhood. That when we're talking about fatherhood, there's something larger that we're part of.
Mm. And I know that um, these kinds of access to support, like a men's group, it's not always readily available to all of us dads. And so I'm wondering if you have any advice or tips for fathers who are watching and listening to this. What are some ways they might invite support or seek support in their lives that would help them in the ways that you've outlined?
My first suggestion would be um, to see if they could get together with three, four, five other dads. If they're in preschool, if their kids are in preschool in their neighborhood, if they went to a prenatal class to say after our babies are born, why don't we get together? Um, my groups meet every other week, get together once a month, every other week, find a time to do that, and connect up with each other. And that could happen in a variety of ways, whether it's taking the kids to the park in the morning or meeting one evening a week, once a month, twice a month with some other dads, whether they meet them through their prenatal group, whether they're friends in their neighborhood, um, whether they can connect up with a few people at work and have a lunch meeting where they talk about being a parent. I think those things and the transition to father, I think those things are critical, particularly in those early years. Because once you get to your child's in school, first grade, second grade, you start to be part of a collective where there are other dads, there are activities, maybe there's a dad's club at school, or you start to have a community where you are with other men around your children pretty readily. I'm sort of focused on this area that I think is where we're kind of on our own those first 3, 4, 5 years. And that's when we need dads the most. And that's when it's often least accessible.
Right.
So I think any way you can create it in your life with some other dads is a good starting. Any way you can be with some other dads, however, in whatever way possible, in these early years. My bias is that the dads in the group say, "Hey, it's really great to have you there, facilitating the group, providing the space, keeping us focused on fatherhood." They really appreciate that. So that's what I would like to develop a little more.
Mm.
And maybe that's something, Mickey, you and I could talk about, because there might be a way through Skype and what you've done to kind of see if there isn't a way we could bring dads together in a facilitated group where some of the issues that we're talking about could help form the basis of a further conversation, much in the way that women did consciousness raising groups in the 60s to say, hey, let's look at our situation as women and what do we want in life. And they wanted to be able to move more into the world outside the home and be more, equal pay, have opportunities. And I think we're on the other side of the spectrum.
Hmm.
Hey, how can we get together and say, how can we have more time in the home with our kids? How can we make family life more integrated? And maybe doing some consciousness raising around that is important. And then it leads to a discussion where, like the framework of the developmental phases of fatherhood, that I have begin to make some sense. And we begin to have a little map and say, oh, okay, of course I'm going through this. Of course, gee, when I'm an expectant dad, I should be talking with other dads because that's going to facilitate something in me.
Mm,
And yet, when I have a young child, probably good to talk to other fathers because that's going to give me perspective on parenting, on my marriage, on what I want for myself as a man. Hey, I'm going to encounter my own father again in a new way now that I'm a father.
mm,
So we become aware that, oh, of course, these are the issues we're going through. And that reaching out and sharing it with other men is going to be very um, helpful. In fact, it's kind of a necessity. And it just, in general, I mean, I think better quality of life to feel like there's people you can depend on and who you can know and who can know you.
yeah.
I want people to hear my story. Um, I want to listen and hear other people's story, but I want to be known by other people. I think we're all looking for that as men and as dads in particular, because boy, we have so many stories to tell. The sleepless nights, the funny and crazy things that go on, the challenges that we wonder how what is this? I thought I was in a sleep deprivation experiment my kid's life, and how do you survive that? Yeah. I don't know what other thing. This probably is going to sound a little too self-serving, but really I mean it in the best way, Nikki. I think my book, either Becoming a Dad, How Fatherhood Changes Men, or I'm going to reprint Finding Time for Fatherhood. Either of those books, they're a very good guide for a father's group
Mm,
because very short articles. At the end of each of the article is like three questions for self-reflection. So there are articles touching on. It's sort of like a father's group in a book. So there and the latest version, which is the version of Becoming a Dad, How Fatherhood Changes Men. There's a lot of material in there that's all out of the groups that I've done. So I have some poems that I've written. I have some quotes in the back. And oftentimes in the group, I'll write the quotes on papers and pass them around. And we'll pull them out of a hat. And you'd be surprised at what quote each man gets and how meaningful it is to them.
mm.
There's lots of things you can use the book for to help if you're trying to figure out, well, if we get together, what are we going to talk about? What do we do? I think that's kind of a little bit of a map, a little bit of a guidebook people can use.
Wonderful. There'll be a link to those books with this video, and it's been an absolute delight talking to you, Bruce, and hearing your experiences and the four phases and everything. So thank you so much for taking the time. And yes, I look forward to exploring that with you at some point.
Yeah.
The possibility of creating an online Skype circle of dads.
Yeah. Well, great, Mickey. Thank you so much for reaching out. Really great to connect with you too.